everybody. I'm so glad to see people showing up for this resilient landscaping webinar. And this is Amy Balhars. I'm president of Safer West County and super excited to be hosting this event. So many of us are dealing with seeing fires more and more as an annual event and wondering how we can make our homes safer, but at the same time, not really wanting to make our homes deplete of wildlife habitat as well as beauty. And so this webinar is just perfect for you if you've had any of those concerns. And I want to welcome you. And I just want to give you a quick idea of what Safer West County does in case you haven't heard of us. We are basically working in the West Sonoma County to make our community more resilient. And that includes reducing the risk of fire as well as improving emergency preparedness in our communities. And we're a collaborative group of volunteers. We have people working in Forestville, Guerneville, Monterey, Camp Meeker, Occidental, Freestone, Bodega Bay. And very, very excited about some of the emerging fire safe councils that are in that area, as well as the ones that have been working for a number of years. And that's part of what we do, is collaborate as different communities. It's all volunteered. We'd love for you to join us. And if you haven't got the time to join us, at least stay connected with us. Do both by signing up. We're working on our Safer West County website, so you can sign up right now at firesafeoccidental.org, which is one of the fire safe councils that's part of Safer West County. And we work on things like this type of program, as well as improving evacuation routes and everything in between. So we'd love your involvement, and we'd just love to stay connected with you. So that's firesafeoccidental.org is where you can sign up. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ellie, who's going to tell you everything about tonight's program.
Yeah, and thank you, Amy, and thank you everyone for joining us. I especially want to thank Amy, Andrew Stoll, Carolyn Stell, and everyone else from Safer West County for encouraging us to do this program. I want you to know it's being recorded, and if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A box. We'll be answering them, some of them in writing and some of them when we have a question and answer at the end. So you'll know when it's time to do that. And I'm part of this Resilient Landscape Coalition, which I'll tell you about a little bit more. I'm a landscape architect. My name is Ellie Inslee. I'm with the Sonoma Ecology Center. And our mission is to work with our community to identify and lead actions that achieve and sustain ecological health in Sonoma. And I'm really happy to be the first of 4 panelists in this Firewise and Sustainable Landscaping presentation. And I like to use the subtitle Garden as if Life Depends on It to refer not just to taking care of our defensible space to protect our homes and our lives, but also to provide habitat, food, shelter for the wildlife that we share this land with. So we'll be talking about that. And let me see if I can't forward my presentation here. There we go. Okay. So the Resilient Landscapes Coalition, we've been working together for 2.5 years, and the whole purpose of it is to bring together the information about defensible space and sustainability and ecology. So the team that got together, besides myself, I'm with, as I said, the Sonoma Ecology Center, and also John Kanegi works with me. He's a landscape designer and a horticulturalist. And we not only provide the kind of information you'll see today, but we have vegetation management crews. We can do a lot of landscape design, and we do a lot of research. So Sonoma Ecology Center is a research-based organization. And then Mimi Enright, the UC Master Gardener program of Sonoma County, she's the head of the program, and that's their website. And I'm going to let people introduce themselves and say more about themselves as we go, and their organization as we go along. April Owens, Habitat Corridor Project. She's the executive director. She also has her own landscaping firm, and she's the horticulture chair of the Milo Baker chapter of the Native Plant Society. And then Roberta McIntyre of Fire Safe Sonoma has been a major champion of ours and is part of the team and is a grant writer extraordinaire and just a terrific cheerleader for this work that we're doing. And we've also been working in partnership with the County of Sonoma Fire Prevention Division. Carol Leon Safford has been instrumental in that. And then CAL FIRE and other local fire departments. And we're still meeting everyone in all the local fire departments. I think they're like 35, but I probably wrong about that. And then you can get more information about what we're presenting at SonomaResilientLandscapes.com. There's a lot of resources there, and that's the website that we created, the 4 different organizations, in order to provide this information to you. So again, I want to thank Safer West County, and I believe that's correct, Amy, the firesafeoccidental.org. Committees,
Yes.
but and then we got funding from Sonoma County Vegetation Management Grant Program, and Kim Batchelder is heading that up. It's the PG&E funds, and we were granted $110,000 in this back in April or May. So that's actually allowed us to do this work. We have been doing it for 2.5 years pro bono. And so now we actually have funding to bring on staff, improve our website, and we're rolling out these workshops all around Sonoma County over the next year. So a little more about that later. So I'm going to be doing ecology and sustainability overview and introduction for about 20 minutes. And then Mimi is going to be doing design and maintenance principles for about 25 minutes. April will be showing us beautiful pictures about landscape design and planting examples for 20 to 25 minutes. And then Dr. Michael Jones of UC Cooperative Extension will be speaking about forest management practices. And then we'll have about 20 minutes for questions and answers.
And
so our aim here is to help.
Ellie, do you want to do a quick introduction of Chief Connect joining us as well?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I should have done that a minute ago. So CAL FIRE Chief Tom Connect is with us, and he's going to be available for the questions and answers. I didn't actually write down all the details, but he's a fire prevention expert for CAL FIRE in this region, and he. One of the things that he pointed out is the most important thing to do is actually stop fires from starting. And I could say this later, but I'll say it now, that the fires in California, in our area of California, typically that are human created. And so what we can do in our defensible space to actually prevent fires from happening will actually keep fires. The best, as he said, the best fire is when it never starts. So if we can keep fires from happening or getting very big in our defensible space, that's super important. So, so our aim here is to help people create defensible space that's beautiful, sustainable, and biodiverse. And we're trying to bust the myth of the moonscape. So many people think the only thing that's fire safe is to just have a few trees in a landscape of landscape rocks. Or other people think they don't know what to do, they feel overwhelmed, and so they do nothing. So our job here is to show you the most efficient way to take care of your landscape and to have beauty and also biodiversity. So the featured here is a native plant that's fire-wise. It's also sustainable. In other words, it uses very little water, and it's great for wildlife habitat. It's called coral bells, and it's one of the types of plants that we like to recommend. So just really quickly, and you're going to hear this from Mimi and April, the basic principles in defensible space are to harden the house first and then work outwards. And we can put in the chat you can access the chat, but I don't think you can actually write in it. So we're going to be putting some URLs in the chat. So to harden your home, there's a really good resource at Sonoma County. That's the most important thing to do. Keep embers from getting in your house and catching it on fire. And then implement the 0 to 5 ember defense zone, also known as the home ignition zone. We have a nice picture, and you'll see a bunch more of the 0 to 5 zone. And then create islands of plants with non-combustible paths between them to interrupt the path of fire. And then maintenance is essential. So to sort of clear out the confusion. Those are the main important things. And then Mimi and April will go into more details. I want to mention quickly the regulations that all landowners are responsible for knowing about defensible space. The state Public Resources Code 4291 is the basis for all guidelines and regulations for what to do in the defensible space zone. And using that as a platform, the Sonoma County Chapter 13A is the ordinance that that we need to follow. And there's the state responsibility area and the local responsibility area, SRA and LRA. It's important to know about them. I'm hoping John is putting those in the chat so that you can get more information about that later. And then there are additional requirements and restrictions in the high and very high fire hazard severity zones to know about. And then if you live along a creek or adjacent to a wildland, there are other things to know about, county regulations, state and federal regulations. So I won't go into that, but it's just kind of an important reminder. So a little bit of history about fire. This is a great website, Why Fire. It's firemap.sdsc.edu. And this one shows all the fires from 1878 through 2016 in this part of Sonoma County. This is most of Sonoma County. And highlighted here is the Hanley Fire of 1964. Over here in West County, you can see not much happened between 1878 and 2016. There's the Roberts Fire, and I think that was about Robertson Fire, 1961, 2,000 acres. There's the Creighton Fire, Creighton Ridge Fire, 78 of 10,700 acres. But, you know, a lot of small fires. And then in 2016 through 2020, that's where the big, you know, the sort of Darth Vader ugly black fires came along. The Kincaid Fire of 76,000 acres, the Walbridge Fire of 55,000, and then the Glass Fire of 67,000 acres. As you can see, there's still a lot of open space, non-unburned area in West County, and that's, you know, a major interesting point and concern. It means there's a lot of unburned areas. There's a lot of vegetation that is susceptible to fire, a really, you know, massive fire. And because we've been suppressing fire and because we have climate change, that's a really very huge concern. The wildland urban interface or intermix is that area where homes and associated structures are built among forest, shrubs, or grasslands. And here in Sonoma County, West County, we have a lot of intermix. So there's not like a strict line between the wildland and the urban. It's more mixed with rural and suburban homes. But so we have climate change, we have fire suppression, we have increased development in the wildland, which gives us increased fire risk and also increased potential for catastrophic fire, which means one that can actually destroy homes and destroy entire ecosystems. The super hot fires that are stand conversion fires, they turn oak woodlands and chaparral or forests into grasslands, or they change, you know, the makeup of the habitat. So we really want to avoid those, not only because of the harm to, you know, humans and the trauma, but because when a house burns, the air becomes extremely toxic, the landscape is toxic, the toxic runoff goes into the water, you got to put what's left in the dump, and then you got to go build a new one, which from an ecological standpoint causes a lot of, you know, resource extraction. So more and more reasons to keep your house from burning. So I also just wanted to point out the 64 Hanley Fire, which is the pink outline here, and then the 17 Tubbs Fire. Two interesting points. The Hanley Fire got from Calistoga to Santa Rosa. This is the 101 corridor. This is Santa Rosa in about 9 days. And the Tubbs Fire got the same distance in about 9 hours because of the super hurricane winds. And the other thing to look at here is the low density housing that's moved into the path of fire. We have a lot of high density housing increase, but this is the wildland intermix that we have that causes a lot of the fire. It's a lot harder to have prescribed fire in this area now because of houses. And there's a lot more potential for damaging or, houses burning, and the concern of losing lives and property. So moving into the more fun part, ecology and sustainability in the defensible space zone, we have an important role that we can play supporting ecosystem services. And in a very real sense, we've displaced a lot of wildlife. So it's possible for us to actually go back into our landscapes and find that sweet spot where we can have a fire-wise landscape and also support wildlife habitat. And Doug Calamy, who is a wonderful entomologist or insect scientist, is the author of the book Bringing Nature Home, which I highly recommend. He talks about gardening and how you can bring wildlife back into your garden. And he opens his book, Bringing Nature Home, with the statement, "For the first time in history, gardeners have become important players in the management of our nation's wildlife." So all of us on this team really want to promote this idea, this responsibility of providing wildlife habitat in the garden, while also being firewise and sustainable. So the ecosystem services we can provide in the defensible space zone, our landscapes can provide shade, which is like air conditioning. So you reduce the amount of electricity you use for air conditioning. Hopefully we don't need to do that in the West County, but it's getting warmer and warmer. Obviously aesthetics to make, happy people. We want to enrich the soil and hold it in place. These are all things you can do in your garden. Clean and manage water, slow, spread, sink, and store it. Sequester carbon. The more your soil is enriched, the more carbon it can hold. And supporting birds and other pollinators, or supporting biodiversity. So we can do all these things in our garden. And, we have these incredible declines in biodiversity that are happening now. A 2017 German study reported a decline of more than 75% of insect biomass across a large number of nature areas in Germany between 1989 and 2016. So a 75% decline and those are in nature areas. So, and then we have the well-known drop in the Western monarch butterfly populations of 99.7% drop. So there's only like 0.3%. And I'm not an entomologist and I could have that number wrong, but I know it's quite extreme. So insects are the foundation of many life systems, not only our own. Insects pollinate more than 30% of our food crops. So we really rely on them. And this picture in the middle is a cluster of beautiful native plants that do support insect populations. So in our gardens, we would want to choose native species, at least 70 to 80%, which leaves 20 to 30% of those favorites like roses and lilacs and lemons. These are all plants that I love to have in my garden, but to be sustainable and biodiverse, the native plants actually use less water and they do provide habitat. It's important to plant in islands for bird and butterfly food and shelter and other wildlife. Use integrated pest management, so avoid insecticides and herbicides, and provide a water source. And this is a picture of a monarch butterfly on a narrow-leafed milkweed, which is an important food source, but also the place where the monarchs actually lay their eggs. So also to support biodiversity, keep all plants healthy, use mulch. That's another myth that we want to bust, is that mulch is a problem. You want to keep it 5 feet away from anything flammable, not just your house, but your fences, a little bit away from the base of the trees. Healthy plants, also more fire resistant. So we avoid using fire safe plant lists, but the point is that if you have a healthy plant that's well placed, it will also be much more fire resistant. An important point about oaks, they have the highest food productivity for wildlife. So acorns in the fall and caterpillars in the spring a lot of people don't know this, but birds actually feed their young exclusively caterpillars and insects in the spring. And caterpillars are very high in fat and calories and other nutrients. So we want to keep the oak trees healthy so that they can actually support caterpillars and acorns. And to do that, leaf litter supports the insects and birds and the microorganisms that are in the roots that keep all plants healthy, particularly oaks. So speaking of birds, birds are protected by the Federal Migratory Bird Species Act. And so the timing of vegetation management is really important. We can't actually disrupt birds while they're nesting. So they're nesting from March through August. So if you want to do a little bit of pruning and trimming from March through August, that's fine. In some cases, you have to mow the grass because annual grasses can be a fire hazard. If you need to do anything substantial during bird breeding season, we highly recommend that you do a bird survey, which basically means just going out and walking the landscape. And if birds come up and start harassing you, then you know that you've got a nest there and you need to stay away from that for at least 8 to 10 days, because that's how long it takes for the birds to fledge. So the best time to do heavy trimming and pruning is September to February when they're not nesting. And then I love to put this slide in. It may not be obvious about, defensible or firewise, but a lot of insects, at least 50% of them that we know of, actually are nocturnal. And so if you light up your whole landscape like this, it actually can really affect biodiversity in the insects and other wildlife as well. In the little cutout is a native firefly, and they actually locate each other by the very faint light at the end of their abdomen. So if you're lighting everything up like that, they can't find each other. But also insects that rest during the night who are out during the day really can't sleep. So a couple of more slides for supporting sustainability: enrich the soil and hold it in place using mulch and vegetation. Encourage water, which also helps encourage water to infiltrate and protects water quality for fish, and also rejuvenates the aquifer. We want to avoid overclearing, so you don't ever want your landscape to look like that. That's having no vegetation will cause erosion, could cause landslides, and will also actually provide a space for invasive, highly fire-prone species like broom, annual grasses like oat grass to come in, and they're very hard to get rid of. So here's a plug for keeping your soil healthy for carbon sequestration. Carbon is not just sequestered in the plant mass above ground. Quite a bit of it is in the plant mass below ground. And then even more of it is actually held in the soil. So keeping our soil healthy helps keep plants healthy, fire resistant, and sequestering carbon. So second to last slide, our group, the Resilient Landscapes Coalition, part of the reason we formed is we wanted to help people understand how to landscape in the various plant communities in which they live. So I know that Andrew Soul, in person that comes to mind, lives right next to a chaparral, and many others are in the oak woodlands, and many others are in the coniferous forest. Little picture down here is what the ground plane of many coniferous forests might look like. So we can have separate workshops about the beyond the 100-foot, beyond the defensible space in some of these areas. And I'm happy if people want to help put that together. But right now we're really just talking about how to work in the defensible space zone. But basically, one of the main things is getting rid of invasive species when you're out in these larger landscapes. So this is my last slide. We encourage you to become more intimate with your garden and your wildlife neighbors while reducing fire risk and enhancing biodiversity. It's worth the time and effort. One thing is it takes less time to take care of native plants than lawns, and it's much more sustainable. So I'm going to hand it over to Mimi, but before she takes over, we have a poll for you, and I believe that Jen is going to be putting that up. Is that right, Jen? There it is. Here's our
And
poll.
know that this workshop was tailored for Safer West County and West County community. So some of you may need to choose other if you're not a West County resident. And while we're doing the poll, can you see my display screen, Ellie? My first slide?
Yeah.
Great,
Mhm.
perfect, thank you. Just give that a few more minutes. And while we're waiting for that to come up, so this is a slight variation on the traditional workshop model that April and Ellie and I have been giving for the last year plus, in that because our target audience is West County community members, more densely forested environment, we've invited Dr. Mike Jones, Forestry Advisor for UC Corporate Extension, to join us for this session. So excited to see how this slight revision on our model works, and if it's a good fit, we'd love your feedback on that, and we can continue to look at incorporating more forestry management component in future workshops. Okay, so I think, should we go ahead and close the poll, and I'll get started with, looks like we've got some great representation from Occidental for sure. Why don't we share the results? You all can see what the representation is. So great to see that we've got some great representation from West County in today's session. So thanks, Ellie, for the great introduction. My name is Mimi Enright. I'm the program manager for the UC Master Gardener program here in Sonoma County. And if you're not familiar with Master Gardener programs, our mission as UC Master Gardeners is to extend research-based knowledge and information on home horticulture, pest management, and sustainable landscape practices to the residents of Sonoma County in our case. Very proud of the program we have and the work that we do, and certainly recognize the need after the 2017 wildfires complex to develop some more comprehensive outreach to help our community moving forward, to be better prepared, and really thrilled with the partnership we've developed with Habitat Quarter Project and Sonoma Ecology Center in doing this educational outreach. So I've got a lot of territory to cover in a very short amount of time. I'm going to share some basic information with you about defensible space and opportunities you have to create a more fire-wise and sustainable landscape moving forward. And really hoping that this helps give you a framework for assessing your landscape with a fire-wise lens. So I'm going to quickly take you through some basic principles on fire and fire-wise landscaping, and then step you through design recommendations by defensible space zone, do a quick touch on mulch considerations, and then wrap up with a quick recap. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on fire and how it operates, but I do want to cover a few basics which are really important to the context of our conversation today. So very basically, fire must have three elements in order to burn, and that is fuel, oxygen, and heat. And which of these elements can you control? It's the fuel aspect. And at a very, very basic level, fuel is anything that will burn, right? So vegetation, trees, woody shrubs, perennials, landscape mulch, fencing, roof, decks, lawn furniture, arbors, trellises, and planter boxes. And there are three threats or exposures that a building can experience during a wildfire. And those are, I think, what we're more traditionally used to seeing in educational outreach over historical times from CAL FIRE and others, is about direct flame contact. Radiant heat also represents an exposure for building, and traditionally, educational messages have been focused on how to reduce that direct flame contact through defensible space. But as we all know much too well here in Sonoma County, embers are a significant threat, and preparing for embers takes a different approach. So the majority of structure ignitions are associated with embers, and they can ignite building components and contents directly, or ignite vegetation and other combustible items adjacent to or near a building, which can then result in a radiant heat and or direct flame contact exposure. So embers have a way of finding a weakness in a home. And since most building ignitions have been attributed to embers, it's really an important aspect, particularly important aspect for us to be aware of as we work to prepare our homes and landscapes against future fires. So at a previous workshop, a fire official who was joining us introduced us to a new phrase of receptive fuel beds. You really want to start trying to look at your landscape with a new lens for identifying any receptive fuel beds, right? Where those embers could land and would ignite organic materials and possibly transmit fire to your home. So for example, embers may land on and ignite debris that is accumulated in your gutter, and then that burning debris in the gutter then causes a direct flame contact on the edge of the roof and spreads it to the structure. So let's start with some very key basic foundational recommendations to make your landscape more fire-wise. And Ellie touched on these at the start of her presentation. But I do think they bear a lot of iteration and reiteration. You want to make sure you're removing all dead or dying plants and branches and removing any ladder fuels. You want to create islands of plantings separated by non-combustible paths to help interrupt the path of fire. You want to avoid planting or mulching close to structures. And you want to make sure you're pruning up any tree limbs at least 6 feet from the ground or 1/3 the height of the tree. So how can you apply a Firewise lens to plant selection? And as Ellie referenced, many of you may have been hoping for a fire-resistant plant list, but the reality is that all plants will burn and can burn. There's a really compelling photograph from the Tubbs fire of some succulents that had burned. It's much more important to consider where you place a plant in your landscape and then how you maintain it. There's a number of considerations you want to keep in mind when you're selecting plants for your landscape. You want to choose plants that will grow to a size that's appropriate for their location. You know, it's really misleading, and I've fallen victim to this myself. When you pick up that little 4-inch potted plant at a nursery, you really need to pay attention to what its mature size will be and where you're planning to put it in your landscape. And you especially want to make sure you're locating plants where excess pruning is not required to maintain desired spacing. And are you putting that plant somewhere where it's going to thrive? If it's a plant that prefers shade, are you putting it in full sun? And are you up for the maintenance that that plant's going to require? Or is it invasive? Will it spread to a neighbor's property and create a fire threat? And you really need to really keep in mind how a plant might change over its lifespan. And lavender is a great example. It starts out as herbaceous and becomes much more woody over the span of its life. So after being really deeply enmeshed in this topic, I have started to see my landscape through a different lens. And I think about how fire will move through the landscape around my home and how much fuel could possibly in that landscape could be adding to a fire. How much woody mass is there? So with this lens last winter, I cut back some larger salvias that had become really woody. And they grew back beautifully last spring with much more herbaceous stems with much less woody mass. They'll become woody again in a year or two, and I'll cut them back again. But if you don't want to do that kind of regular maintenance, then plant selection for how a plant will change over time is an important consideration as well. So hopefully you're all familiar with the concept of ladder fuels. The goal is to reduce the possibility of having fire move from the ground plane into the crown of trees. So you want to make sure that you're avoiding planting shrubs under trees. But if you do have shrubs under trees, then you want to allow at least 3 times the height of that shrub between it and the lowest tree limb. Again, you want to make sure you're keeping all tree limbs up 6 feet from the ground or 1/3 of the height of the tree. And then it's really critical to continue to maintain it as it grows. So here's some work that Ellie did on her property in the Grayton area to remove some ladder fuels. And in this case, it's a very vilified shrub in Sonoma County. It's an older juniper shrub below a tree. So you can see the before picture on the upper left, and then on the right, you see some cleanup work that Ellie did to move the shrub back away from the tree and then reduce its height. And then you can see in the small picture on the lower left, some work she did to the interior of the juniper shrub to clean out old dead branches and debris. Okay. So your starting point for all your work is your house. And we're not going to go into the topic of home hardening today, as our focus is on the landscape, but I know that John already shared in the chat a great resource for you on home hardening. And there's really lots of resources to help guide you through that home hardening process, but that is absolutely your starting point. But from once you've completed your home hardening work, then you want to start moving out into your defensible space zones. And here are the different defensible space zones that we're going to be discussing today. The first is the 0 to 5 foot around your structures, then 5 to 30 foot, and then 30 to 100 feet around your home and structures on your property. So let's start with the 0 to 5 foot zone, what's called the Ember Defense Zone. So this is really a relatively newer zone introduced into defensible space recommendations. And I have to say, even just 2.5 years ago, when April and Ellie and I came together to try to start working on developing this content, we were having a really hard time finding graphics that existed that depicted the 0 to 5 foot defensible space zone. I want to stress that this zone is supported by scientific research, and that the objective of this zone is to reduce the chance of those wind-blown embers that we talked about earlier from a fire, landing near the home and igniting combustible debris or materials. So this zone is closest to the house, right? So it requires the most careful selection and management of vegetation and other possible fuels. Classically, we've massed shrubs against our homes called foundation shrubs. So this is really a big shift away from how we have traditionally designed our landscapes. But we really need to think about the fuel that generates for fire in immediate proximity to our house. So the recommendation is to minimize planting in this zone, especially under vents and eaves, in front of windows or combustible siding, and under or near a deck. And optimally, you want no combustible materials, such as plants or wood mulch, to be used in this zone. The ideal would be a decorative rock or hardscape to create your ember defense zone. We aren't suggesting that you need to remove trees if they are in your 0 to 5 foot zone. Trees provide a really important shade that Ellie referred to during summer to help reduce energy needs inside your home. The most important aspect to consider with trees that are closer to your home is what debris they drop that you then need to maintain on your roof and in those zones immediately around structures. So it can make your maintenance easier if you remove limbs within 6 feet of your rooftop. And of course, you want to ensure that you're regularly removing any dead plant materials in this zone that might be dropped by those trees. And to prune up all tree limbs 10 feet from a chimney or a stovepipe outlet, and that is a Sonoma County Code requirement. So Ellie was kind enough to visit some properties in West County before our workshop, and this is one of the pictures that she shared. And this is a great example of a good 0 to 5 foot defensible space zone, right? We've got that concrete perimeter, that pathway around the structure. But look at all that redwood duff that's been dropped into that zone. So you want to be maintaining, cleaning up that leaf litter throughout the year, and then particularly during fire season. And if we're on a red flag warning day, or if you're needing to evacuate your home from a fire that's threatening, for sure you want to, if you have the time, remove this plant debris from this 0 to 5 foot zone. And I want to say it's not just redwood forest communities that have this maintenance need. I have an oak tree probably within 10 feet of my home that's year-round is dropping twigs, acorns, and leaves. So because I live in northeastern Sonoma County in a high fire severity zone, very high fire severity zone, adjacent to the WUI, I can assure you that I'm being very diligent, particularly on red flag warning days, to remove that debris from around my house perimeter. And I want to stress that each individual needs to assess their own risk and make their own appropriate decisions for better preparing their home for to be safer in future fire threats. Because a lot of people really struggle with the idea of removing all the plant materials within their 5-foot zone around their home, because that concept of foundation shrubs directly against our house has become so deeply ingrained, we're trying to share some ideas of what you can do in that 0 to 5-foot zone around your structures. There's really a lot of creative ways to use hardscape in this zone that will prevent embers from igniting organic material and transmitting that fire to your home. And here's a few more pictures of a few ideas of what some folks have done here in Sonoma County to create their ember defense zone. On the left, another picture from West County in Redwood Forest, and on the right, a property in the Glen Ellen community in eastern Sonoma County. Okay, so let's move on to the 5 to 30-foot zone. And this is commonly referred to as the home defense zone. And this is likely where firefighters will have to make a stand if they're working to defend your home from a wildfire. So you really want to keep this in mind to ensure that firefighters have ease of access in this zone. So the recommendation for this zone is to plant in islands that are separated by non-combustible pathways. Again, the goal is to interrupt that flow of fire to your home. Plantings in this zone should optimally be herbaceous, which means not woody, and 3 feet in height or less. And you can consider inclusion of a shrub or tree, but optimally it would be a specimen or a single tree or shrub rather than masses. You want to make sure that all plants are accessible for regular maintenance, which is a really critical component of your preparedness, as you really want to make sure you're keeping all plants clear of dead plant material year round. And the recommendation is not to use wood mulch in this zone. You might want to consider using compost as mulch in this zone instead of wood mulch. And this is a really great zone for hardscape, such as patios. But again, that same context of each of us needs to be assessing your own fire risk. If wood mulch is, the most affordable option for you, maybe you want to make sure you're really keeping your planting islands minimized and minimizing your use of mulch in this zone, and then definitely incorporating in that hardscape to break up those planted areas. So basics from a design lens, again, are low growing, mostly perennial plants that are well maintained. To consider inclusion of hardscape to break up the planted areas. And here's another great photo that Ellie got in West County of a West County home with a patio. It's a really great use of hardscape in the 5 to 30-foot zone. Some more design inspiration on the left. West County home, again with a patio hardscape element in that 5 to 30-foot zone. And then on the upper right, we have post 2017 fire rebuild with a really nice example of mostly herbaceous plants under 3 feet with a few specimen trees, and those planting areas are separated by a gravel path. Okay, in the 30 to 100-foot zone, which is called the reduced fuel zone, we really have the same basic principles as the 5 to 30-foot zone, but you can include shrubs and trees in more widely spaced groups. And you want to continue the focus on creating islands of vegetation that are separated by hardscape. And again, you want to make sure that you have easy access for maintenance. Wider pathways can certainly help facilitate that access. Continue your vigilance on ladder fuel removal and regularly removing dead plant material. And use of wood mulch or leaving leaf litter is okay in this zone. You do need to keep all annual grasses mowed to 4 inches in height. And you want to move any wood piles to this zone with nothing combustible located near the wood pile. So I know this is all really easy if you're starting from a blank slate, right? But most all of us are not starting from a blank slate. And many of you may be in more densely wooded environments. So this is a really great East Bay mud graphic that shows before and after maintenance for an existing mature landscape. And I would love to put a plug out for if any of you are undertaking this defensible space work and you take before and after pictures, we'd love to get copies of them because we'd love to have more resources to be able to illustrate to folks what this can look like when you do this work. But in the before graphic on the upper left, we see no break in planted areas, those foundation shrubs massed up against the house, trees in too much close proximity to the chimney, tree branches going down to shrubs. And after maintenance on the lower right, we have islands of vegetation. Shrubs next to the house have been removed. Trees are limbed up. So those ladder fuels below the trees are removed, and shrubs and trees have been thinned. So there are CAL FIRE recommendations for plant spacing guidelines. These aren't based on scientific research, but these are the best recommendations from our firefighting officials within the 100-foot defensible space zone around your home. And I want to stress that these are not mandated by law. These are guidelines for spacing, and they're due to flame height and are based on the slope of the land around the home, which is a major consideration in assessing your wildfire risk. Of course, I'm sure we all know a fire will burn faster and more intensely uphill than along flat ground. And a steeper slope will result in a faster moving fire with longer flame lengths. So this graphic kindly developed by Ellie for us, because we're not finding really great graphics to use. This graphic depicts shrub spacing. And we have talked to fire officials, and they've told us that for separation between these shrub groupings that you see depicted in this graphic, low growing, well irrigated grasses or ground covers or perennials are considered to be acceptable between these shrub groupings. But again, each of us needs to assess the overall risk of our own property with degree of the slope and our overall fire risk to make appropriate decisions in our own home landscapes. So this graphic is depicting suggested horizontal tree spacing, as well as vertical separation, that ladder fuel topic we discussed earlier. Note again in that upper graphic, or in each of the graphics on the upper right, that 3 times the height of the shrub from the top of the shrub to the lowest tree branches, and spacing on less than a 20% slope of 10 feet between trees is recommended. And on steeper slopes, of course, that recommended distance is increased. So we really want to stress that we don't have to denude our landscapes in the 100-foot perimeter around our home. You don't have to create a moonscape, but we do want to ensure that we have some spacing to reduce fuel volume and help break up the flow of fire to your home. Okay, mulch. Mulch is a really important sustainable landscaping aspect for water conservation, which we all know is critically important for us here in California, and particularly in a drought year. Mulch helps not only with water conservation, but with weed suppression. But wood mulches are organic, and as such, they are combustible materials which can transmit fire. So it's recommended to not use mulch in a widespread or a continuous manner. And again, I want to stress that the scientifically supported recommendation is for no organic mulch in the 0 to 5 foot zone. So in these pictures, also 2 homes rebuilt after the 2017 fires, you can see on the right, they've got a rock perimeter in that 0 to 5 foot zone, and on the left, a gravel seating area. But I do want to point out on that picture on the left, on a red flag warning day, those wicker chairs are highly combustible, and you're going to want to move those out of that 0 to 5 foot zone in part of your red flag warning day preparation work. So composted wood chips demonstrated the least hazardous fire behavior overall of 8 mulch treatments that were tested in the study by the University of Nevada at Reno and the University of California. Again, the recommendation is to use a 2 to 3 inch deep layer of wood mulch in islands of plantings. And then you want to separate those mulched areas with non-combustible and ignition resistant materials such as concrete, gravel, rock, or a native grass lawn. And here's 2 graphics of some great examples for separating those mulched areas. In the right, that's a dry creek bed separating your planted areas. And on the left, there's a gravel pathway separating the planted areas. The recommendation is to choose a larger sized arbor mulch and absolutely no gorilla hair. The smoldering combustion that's produced by this mulch treatment may not be readily noticeable during a wildfire event and may go undetected by firefighters. So the picture on the left shows you some composted wood chips. And then that on the right, that's gorilla hair mulch. This is a picture from Fire Safe Marin, and you can see how embers landed in the gorilla hair and can tend to smolder. And then the risk is that firefighters may move on to defend another property. Those embers could flare up and spread fire to the home. Okay, so here's a quick recap on the FireWise design considerations in the defensible space zone. In the 0 to 5 foot zone from your home, you want to use inorganic materials such as gravel or stepping stones. In the 5 to 30 foot zone from your home, you want to plant in islands separated by hardscape, and optimally using plant materials such as low herbaceous perennials, grasses, or succulents under 3 feet in height, and specimen or individual shrubs or trees would be optimal. And then that 30 to 100 foot zone from the house, you want to have the same basic principles as 5 to 30 foot zone, but you can include shrub and tree groupings in more widely spaced groups separated by areas that break up the wildfire. And can't stress enough, ongoing maintenance is essential for a fire-wise landscape, particularly with the drought. You want to be monitoring trees and shrubs really closely and removing dead or dying branches regularly. You want to prune out any dead material from the interior of shrubs if possible. This is particularly true for shrubs that are sheared. They develop a lot of dead debris on the interior of that you can't see. It might look all green and healthy from the exterior, but there's a lot of flammable material on the interior of those hedged shrubs. And you want to remove any ladder fuels, of course, prioritizing removing any shrubs planted directly under trees. So hopefully this has helped give you a framework for assessing your landscape and making it more fire-wise. For more information, we have many resources on the Resilient Landscapes website, as well as the Master Gardener website for Sonoma County to help you with both water-wise and fire-wise gardening and much, much more. Here's a link to our webpage, and you're always welcome to send your questions to our Master Gardener information desk via the email listed. And April gets the lovely job next, and I think we're going to take a brief break between our two presentations, but April gets the lovely job of talking to you about plants and showing you lots more really beautiful pictures of native plants to help inspire you and give you more design ideas for creating defensible space in your landscape. So April, don't know if there's any questions. Of course.
Thank you so much, Mimi. I wonder if there's a couple questions.
So I do see one. I see, is ivy a ground cover considered a safer material near the house? Ivy, I'm sure Chief Connect has some real opinions on ivy. So for sure you want to remove vines from fences or climbing up trees, right? They would just transmit the fire right up into the tree or into the fence. And I'm sure that's the case with a lot of ivy, but as a ground cover, it's that you want to use that same lens. Is it a receptive field bed? Is there a lot of dead materials built up in the interior of that ivy? Is it irrigated? You know, you really have to try to give that broader lens to it, rather than just thinking of one individual plant versus another as a safe or not safe material to have near the home. I don't know if April, if you would add anything else on top of that.
Yeah, I think that's really appropriate. I've had clients say that ivy is a bee plant, like the bees really love it as a pollinator plant. But again, as my lens is more in the native plant, I think that the bees would much appreciate some other plants.
Like Chief Connect might have an opinion on this topic.
I have a mild opinion on ivy. Ivy tends to be, you know, sort of a moisture content, kind of a high kind of a plant. The unfortunate thing is ivy tends to hide a lot of dead and downed leaves underneath it. So it doesn't tend to get raked, if you will, or the combustible organic material underneath it. So the ivy may survive, but the dead organic material underneath it will burn. So that's where I am concerned as a fire official with ivy really like bumping up in the 0 to 5 zone. Everywhere else, it's probably fine for the 0 to 30 to 30 to 100. But in the 0 to 5 zone, we really, really want to have like nothing combustible in that zone.
Perfect. All right, April, do you want to?
Okay, I'm ready to go.
Could I actually just wanted to ask a question about what to put under plants in the 5 to 30 zone. If I'm feeling a little confused because I thought that in other conversations we've had with fire professionals that mulch was okay under the vegetation in 5 to 30, as long as there were non-flammable pathways between them. And I just wanted to get some clarification about that.
So I'd say optimally, if you could use compost, I think that would be really amazing. I'm going to be experimenting, even though I live in hot Cloverdale, with using gravel as a mulch in my 5 to 30 foot zone. Again, I would say it speaks to every individual needing to assess their own fire risk. I live in a very high fire severity zone directly abutting the WUI. I'm going to be really cautious about where I'm using wood mulch. I don't know if Chief Connect, if you have more thoughts that you would add to that topic on the 5 to 30.
Yeah, I gotta, I can see that it's, it's an individual choice. It's definitely, there's no prescription for that you can have for the entire Sonoma County or Western Sonoma County that'll apply for everything. I look at it globally, like as a fire official that's responding, and we have to react to conditions. And we cannot put a fire engine on every single structure in front of a wildland fire that's moving, because someone needs to put the fire out. So I really emphasize, and Ellie's not wrong. If you break up if you have pathways that breaks up the ground fuels between composting, along a house, that's awesome. There's other home hardening things that we can talk about, which is not the topic of this this webinar. But that's where I look at a very, disaster level of situation of, firefighters are going to roll in and take a quick look at a house, and can we defend it, or do we need to move on to the next house, or do we fight the fire? So that's those are tough choices that we make, unfortunately, daily and weekly, that affect a lot of people. And that's kind of my view. If I had a choice, I would really limit the amount of vegetation, or have it really, really well manicured, well, taken care of in that 0 to 5 zone, because structures, when they ignite, they are some of the worst ember throwing fuels that are out there.
And just to
Ellie is
clarify,
really asking about the 5 to
the 5 to 30 zone,
30.
mulch in the 5 to 30 zone.
Yeah, Captain Nick.
And I think that
that's the big thing, and and it just depends on your plant material. Like Ellie, Mimi, you're saying you want to put rock mulch. Well, you're gonna make sure that the plants that you're putting in there can accept that heat and that rock mulch. Like a lot of plants aren't going to be happy in that space.
Oh, if we're talking the 5 to 30, yeah, mulch,
30.
like all the good mulches are good, because mulch will retain moisture in the soil very, very close. Mulching is good. And even if embers land in the 5 to 30 zone with a mulch that starts to catch fire, it typically creeps and doesn't, throw embers or anything. So mulch has more advantages than disadvantages in the 5 to 30 zone.
that's good to hear. And I also just want to mention my comment earlier about leaf litter. And not everybody's going to be willing to do this, but a lot of trees, in particular oaks, need the leaf litter that they're dropping to help as a nutrient to their root systems. So it's, a lot of oaks are dropping their leaves after fire season, so you don't have to clean things up while it's wet. If you want to clean up the leaves as it comes around to May, for when we have fire season starting early, then that's okay. But you can actually have some oak leaf litter under your oaks in the 5 to 30, as long as you keep it clean and keep those pathways. So thank you for that.
And I would also advocate to really rake around the trunks at least a little bit. If there was some extra maintenance, if you were sitting on your hands looking at what do I need to do, and you have some oaks, to just kind of rake a couple feet around the trunks of oaks, because the crown of the tree and the drip line, if you will, to have that leaf litter is good. But we really struggle when fire gets established in an oak tree, either in a cap face or otherwise. And that's a tough one for us when we're fighting the fire.
I
for
think
that.
we've got a lot of territory left to cover.
Okay,
So we
thank
should-
you. Okay, we're gonna get going. I'm gonna share my screen. How do we look?
Great.
So my part of the workshop is like, oh, you just got all this information. And I'm here to like give some context around plant material and also build some questions for the end. So we will have plenty of help with questions, but we also have Mike, our forester. So I'm gonna be quick tonight, quicker than I usually am, because I really want, I know that the West County is a forested situation, and we really want to make sure that he has time to that. So this Resilient Landscapes Coalition really is amazing. And what I want as a designer, so I'm kind of the landscape designer piece. And we look at resilient landscapes as biodiverse, drought resistant, fire-wise, and beautiful. So it's really looking at it from the systemic point of view, like you're taking the super high level, like that we live in California and we have all these things that we are, dealing with in the landscape. So I'm April Owens, and I am the executive director of the Habitat Quarter Project, and we are really focused on native plant demonstration gardens. I also sit as a board member of the California Native Plant Society, both at the state level and the local chapter level. So we really need to look at, like I said, the systems thinking. So the definition of resilient is capable of withstanding shock without permanent deformation or rupture. So tending to recover from and adjust easily. And so I feel like that's what our group is really looking at. Like, what are the plants that are going to come in here? How are we going to deal with drought? We just got hit hard. I have a landscape design company as well. And we are looking at, we're in a drought. And so people don't want to plant, or they're ripping things out, or they aren't watering their landscapes, and these biodiversity rich native plants that the bees and butterflies and birds need so much, we just don't want to rip them out and let them die. So there has to be a balance here. I have a funny little story. I was walking my dog this morning, and I got 2 bee stings from bees out of my garden. And I was so annoyed because I'm like, I'm trying to help you guys, and you just stung me and it hurt. But most native bees don't sting. So people have this misnomer around bees and non-native bees. And so there's European honeybees. There's a lot of local bees. There's little like wasps. So you have to, there's this gigantic range of bees, but I just thought I was really mad at that little bee for biting me this morning. So I usually start with backing up Mimi's workshop, where her screen slides around the 0 to 5 and 5 to 30 and 30 to 100. But I wanted to start tonight because she had such beautiful images in her work, in her part, and so did Ellie. I wanted to start with my mission is, why use California native plants? Like, why are they more important, and why use them 70, 80, 90% of your landscape? They keep local insects and animal populations living. They reduce need for water. They're bringing, these were all quotes from people I asked in my friend group of native plant junkies. They're bringing in other species, potentially spread. So if you are not using natives, you're bringing in other species which potentially spread exotic diseases. Beauty, the blooming season matches our climate. Plus, using natives gives another fun aspect and challenge. And that's what I love the most about using natives. So there's this beautiful landscape that you get, but you also get this heightened level of butterflies and bumblebees and exciting visitors to your garden. So I'm going to frame my the 3 different zones with, and really highlight some plants that can be in those zones. And 0 to 5 is definitely the area that we want to see the least amount of plant material and combustion. We want the 0 to 5 to be mostly mulch, like mostly rock and But there are a few things that you can do in that zone and keep these plants really well hydrated. And you can dabble in a tiny bit of this with, especially in West County where we have a little bit. So I've definitely like lended my workshop to West County, but you can lend a little bit to a nice little grouping of Dudleya and Iris and some Juncus, some boulders. This is a drier landscape, like typical 0 to 5, but this is where you can have your containers with some fun non-natives or native annuals and a little bit of fountain. Here is a good example to 0 to 5 where it needs a tiny bit of maintenance. So this is a plant I'll bring up later that's not native in between these flagstones. But then you'd want in the late summer to make sure you trim back these grasses that are native grasses. Some fun client ideas that people did. This wasn't my design, but these fun planters with pebbles, and they're cactuses that are cacti that are very low water use and pretty hydrated. Using no-mow fescue or some kind of native, easily hydrated fescue amongst some fun pavers with steel edging. This is one I show a lot. Take a field trip to a materials yard and look at the different pebbles and different ideas that you can have for the 0 to 5. It doesn't have to be just lava rock or nothing or just bare ground. You can play around with beautiful pebble and then have your islands of biodiversity past that from the 5 to 30. Again, so Diamondia is this ground cover that's very dog tolerant, drought tolerant. So we definitely use non-natives in the landscape, especially for ground covers like this, and also nice succulents amongst some stone steps and boulders. So you can get a little bit of greenery, but keep it limited around your home. So backing up, maintenance is really key to a resilient landscape. So we're trying to save water, and we're trying to create biodiversity, and we're trying to have our home be fire wise. And so in the 0 to 5, if you are adding any plant material, you're going to want to give it a little more water, and you'll save water in the other zones. So these are plants that are great for West County. Yerba buena is a wonderful ground cover. Douglas iris can go completely dry in the summer and come back as a beautiful flower. And then, as Ellie and Mimi both noted, alum root, Heuchera micrantha, which is a great habitat plant and nice little flowering plant for all over West County. So those are just some ideas for the 0 to 5, and check out our website for sure, the Resilient Landscape, SonomaResilientLandscapes.com for more ideas. So moving into the 5 to 30, that was kind of naughty, adding a little bit of plants in the 0 to 5. But the 5 to 30 is where you can do some really well-tended native plant groupings separated. I know Mimi used this image as well, but it's one of my favorite gardens that we've created. Separated by some nice hardscape. This was a raised pathway of flagstone with a lot of crushed rock in between and a little bit of mulch around it. So you get these wonderful masses of plants. Monkey flower and buckwheat are just wonderful habitat plants, easy to use. Well, you can be cut back and tended, and they're very, very resilient. In the background here, we have a little meadow of red fescue with a hammock to enjoy your garden. This is a little garden in Sebastopol that we created, and it's planted since then, but I thought this was a nice view of it so you could see the structure of the 0 to, it's actually 0 to about 12 of this flagstone. It was an existing patio, and we added in an aggregate little patio, some rock walls that are great for breaking breaking fire as you go through. Then there's another, like, so you don't have to think of islands as these like little, like, the islands don't have to be a shape. They can be a long island broken up by a pathway running up through this garden. So I thought this was a sweet idea that you can do in a smaller space to really create a safer space for you. Another West County Sebastopol garden before on the left with the lawn and the shrub of, I think this was boxwood. And we came in and they took out that, kept really the structure. This is a very inexpensive landscape. And they put in some pavers, create a front yard seating area, put in a border of native plants, and a little bit of 2 inches or less of mulch, which is something I use in our landscapes, like keeping it 2 inches or less of an arbor mulch out of the 5 to 30 is something that I feel, and I'm sure that we all feel safe with. So native plants like salvias and penstemons, and again, the alum root, which comes up a lot. And this was a great one because we just easily took out that turf by sheet mulching, and we'll have more of those topics up on our website soon. So the 30 to 100 gives you, I just see it as almost the same, but just more height and some more trees. And like bigger groupings of plants. So drain rock is another really inexpensive element to break up and look. This is a beautiful landscape, nice pathways, but the drain rock is very inexpensive. So you can really separate your islands with a great, easily walkable surface. So this is a garden designed by a wonderful designer in Sonoma, and I just wanted to talk about meadows. I'm not talking about it as much as I usually do because of the drought right now, but this isn't a way to deal with the 30 to 100 and do some meadow grasses that are well tended and mowed with some beautiful, like, gentle. Meadows are so much fun and technically a little difficult. What to use between the masses of plants, it's come up in the last 2 talks, but 2 inches or less of arbor mulch or compost. I suggest hydrating on red flag days and in the fire season. Gravel, crushed rock, lovely native plants, grasses that can really dry out in the summer. And right now with the drought, we are just letting them almost die off, but they will be fine. They'll come back, and we will cut them back really hard. Like we've been cutting them back really hard right now, preparing for fire season, getting them a little water, or really well-maintained ground cover, like ground cover coyote brush, which can be hard pruned every couple of years, like Mimi was talking about her salvias, and comes back really fresh and wonderful. Trees, I usually talk about trees over structures, but I'm excited to have Mike here to talk about trees. So I'm just promoting my favorite tree, the California buckeye, especially for West County, pollinator, butterfly, and bird powerhouse. And then I love to combine it with the elderberry. So this tree can be a really tall tree, or it can be more of a shrubby tree in the oak woodland or understory. I'm going to jump into so the key to a habitat garden and to a well-tended garden, I feel, is to lean on your shrubs. And these are just a few that I love to use. Coffeeberry, Toyon, which came back beautifully from all the fires, is a very resilient plant. And these plants can be really hard cut. I'm just leaning on plants that you can do some really good tending every few years, and they flush out really nicely. The California currant, all year round, you get such pleasure from this plant, in part sun to shade to sun in more coastal regions, as most of you all are at. you get the currants and the right now in the fall, and this beautiful spring flower, super drought tolerant. I don't water my garden, and they are just amazing. I made a little treat for you all, and I posted on the habitatcorridorproject.org, and I need to sort it out a little bit better, so it can download better, but I came up with a little 10 by 10 habitat garden for you guys attending this workshop on the West County, with some fun plants that you're going to really enjoy. You can like lean on these plants that are less maintenance, but it's fun to bring in things like the tiger lily or the Dutchman's pipe vine that can be a ground cover or a vine, and you get these amazing caterpillars. You attract the Dutch vine swallowtail, which is this blue and black butterfly that is just like magical in the garden. It's a touch about irrigation. We need it, we don't need it. Some people water their landscapes and want to tend it themselves, which I recommend because you get to know your garden so much better. You can do native plants and drip on a grid. And this is at our demonstration garden with the Master Gardeners, with the Sonoma County Master Gardeners along the SRJC. We'll send out all these links. I know we've been throwing a ton of links at everybody, so you'll get an email with information about these gardens. But this is a grid layout of drip irrigation. So you don't just irrigate the plant just at its base, but you're giving the soil water. And then there's the low water use Hunter MP rotators, which again give plants a little spray. You can use this just once a week to irrigate your landscape, but it sinks in, gives the plants, especially the native plants, what they want and what the soil wants, because we're learning so much about soil health. So I'm going to walk you quickly through a project in Occidental, and it was wonderful that we have so many people attending from Occidental. So I just wanted to give you a moment of my process as a designer, how we approach a landscape. This is a small weekend cottage off the grid. It's not the least expensive project, but it's a small project. And this was kind of what the landscape looked like when we came on site. Like the soil was just stripped. They've been building, and they've just like, and you know, it's in the middle of a vineyard that they don't own the vineyard, but its setting is Douglas fir forest, some redwoods. Sonoma Land Trust owns the lands behind that image. So they maintain it. So we had to work with them. We worked with them to tend that forest and make sure it was safer. Again, the soils were super compacted. You know, sometimes I don't know what all your landscapes are like, but this is what I come on to a lot. You know, just what are we going to do with soil? What's happened here? So we created this wonderful habitat garden and landscape. I thought you'd love to see this picture of the rain, which we hope is coming. So this was a wet day last year. And so they leaned on hardscape around. So the concrete and hardscape was at the home edge. So this is another thing to consider. Like, what are my uses of the landscape, and where are we going to hang out, and what is the best use of that so that we are fire wise and have a good use of the landscape. And then we broke it up with these pathways of flagstone and pebble. And this is the same site. We used manzanita, McMahon manzanita, which is local to Sebastopol. So we're using local plants. We looked at like Ellie was talking about plant community. So down below, like the redwoods are just beside this side. So down to there, we put in sword fern and huckleberry, and really like address these different zones around this home that sits, even though we're in West County, this home sits amongst many different plant communities. So we tried to represent that. The image on the right is a nice, a 0 to 5, which is a little bit of planting in it. In the rear of the house, our 0 to 5 plus was a swale with a French drain underneath. So we're not sinking water at the base of the house, but we're trying to sink it in, but also create this other element of sustainability, which is sink it, sink it, sink it. A walk down to the redwood forest. So just a couple of tips for successful habitat gardening. You want to use many types of flowers. You want long tubular and aster type. You want large groupings. We call them pollinator targets. You want things flowering at different times. And you want plants that provide both nectar and pollen sources. And this is one of my heartfelt moments was I garden in downtown Sebastopol under giant redwoods, and I always competing with their roots because redwoods have incredible roots, as many of you know. And so this little red bud was in the ground for 2 years, and it was sending all of its life, which natives do. So you need to give them time. It sent 2 years of its life into like finding its way with its roots. And then it delighted me with these beautiful flowers and lovely leaves. So you just really need to give natives time. I think people are too quick to judge natives. So we've talked a lot about resiliency, but sustainability is giving to our next generation, the 7th generation principle. So we need to create these gardens so we're giving to the next generation while protecting our landscapes and our homes and our biodiversity right now. So you can take a screenshot of this or a picture and we'll send this out, but here's all of our organizations. The Sonoma Ecology Center and the Habitat Corridor Project are really excited to help design these gardens and provide that service. We also have a ton of information on all the websites, and the Master Gardeners have incredible materials on their websites. And we hope that you'll get in touch with us and ask more questions after this workshop at our email for the Resilient Landscapes Coalition at gmail.com. And that's all I've got for the moment until we get to questions and answers.
Yeah, I think we have Dr. Michael Jones, right? One more speaker, and then hopefully.
No, I wanted to make sure. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure to give them plenty of time.
Yeah, and we still want to have a little bit of time because there's some unanswered questions that we want to be able to get to.
Nothing like being the last speaker, Mike. Over to you.
Everybody's asleep. Okay.
Hey, we didn't put them to sleep.
All right. Well, thank you all for having me. Good evening. My name is Michael Jones. I am the Extension Forester for the UC Cooperative Extension in Mendocino Lake and Sonoma counties. And so tonight I'll be talking with you about vegetation management in forest lands, and primarily focusing on the role of vegetation management when it relates to wildfire. So just kind of briefly cover, give you an idea of where we're going. We're going to talk about fire and forest ecology. This is really obviously a very important aspect of this talk and what we're talking about tonight. And how that impacts forest health and resiliency in forest lands to wildfire. We'll talk about vegetation management or fuels management as in the context of fire, and then list some resources for folks who are interested in pursuing some of these management activities in their goals and objectives. So I think we've talked a lot about this tonight, but it's always really important to emphasize this because this is really key in how we think about managing our natural resources and our forest lands in California, right? So we live in a Mediterranean climate. This is dry summers, cool, moist winters. We have lots of dry lightning storms during those dry summers. And so fires have existed in these landscapes for hundreds of thousands of years. And then we have Native Americans come along who, until a few weeks ago, we thought they were here for 13,000 years, but now it appears they've been here for like 23,000 years. So, they have certainly been influencing our natural resources and forest lands through their practices of burning. And I'm not just making this up. This is from data from Scott Stevens' lab at Berkeley. He was studying the history of fire in California. Don't worry about reading it too much, but highlight two systems, redwood. So we're in West County, so we have redwood forests and we have California oak woodlands. And if you notice, the fire return interval, or how frequently fires occurred, was a decade or less in these systems. So fire is an extremely common disturbance that had a really important role in shaping the flora and fauna, and through evolution has adapted how they live with fire, how they interact with fire. So fire is critical. And in our effort to control nature, as we tend to like to do, we try to remove fire or exclude fire from these fire adapted ecosystems. And to be frank, we've messed things up. And so one of the primary outcomes of removing fire from a fire adapted ecosystem that needs disturbance is just an incredible accumulation of biomass. So this is a rather famous series of photos from the Plymouth National Forest. Here we have about 100 years in gap between the first photo on the left and the photo on the right. And we see that there's just this incredible amount of biomass accumulation in that time. So this is high elevation dry Sierra forest. It's not just unique to those systems. Here is kind of oak woodlands and mixed conifer hardwood forests in Mendocino County, very similar to West County. And we see there's a significant amount of biomass in the last 50 or 60 years. And so this huge amount of extra biomass on the landscape is certainly affecting the resiliency of these forest lands and natural resource landscapes to wildfire, right? So we're influencing. Fire's going to happen no matter what. There's no way we can exclude them. We tried for 110, 120 years. It's failed miserably. And so now when fires do occur, there's a lot of factors at play, but the amount of biomass is changing the behavior and the way those fires impact these the flora and fauna in these ecosystems. So resiliency to natural disturbances have been significantly impacted. And not only that, but we look at forest health issues, and these are intimately tied together because right in a fire adapted ecosystem, fire is your disturbance that helps maintain the health of your forests. And so in an absence of fire, we have natural succession of conifers and oak woodlands. And in that accumulation of and encroachment of fir, we have lots of mortality. In the high Sierras, we had this huge bark beetle outbreak associated with drought, forest management, lots of issues. But the point is that not only have we affected how much biomass is on the landscape, a lot of that biomass is unhealthy, dead, and dying. It's accumulating, and that changes fire behavior such that we're moving fire from the ground up in the crown. We call it crowning fire, canopy fire. And so when fires in a natural ecosystem burn through, a lot of the time they were what we call low to moderate severity. It would burn through the understory, and we would have some mortality. But now we're seeing much more high severity damage in these systems, and fires are burning into the crown and causing more above ground biomass mortality. So the impacts are more significant. And so we see that in West County, right? The last round of fires we had, the LNU complex, we had some pretty significant fire in redwood systems. And in my experience, the only time I've ever seen stand replacement fire in redwood, where you're actually staring at the ocean and the redwoods are not resprouting, so total mortality. So it's pretty significant, and I think unprecedented in these redwood systems in particular. And so, right, what can we do about this? This is a pretty significant problem. It's pretty daunting, right? 12 of the largest fires in California history or recorded history have occurred in the last 5 years or so. The red ones on this map indicate those fires are still active, so the numbers are still changing. And when we think about fire, what can we control? And so the easiest thing that we can manipulate is vegetation or fuels. We can certainly have a whole nother conversation that would take up this entire period on weather and climate change and how we certainly have a role in how that is factoring into this conversation. But we'll focus on what's most easily achievable in this near-term future, and that's fuels reduction, so managing our vegetation. You can't control topography unless you wanted to start leveling all the steep slopes, but that's unrealistic as well. So what is vegetation management? So here, these are examples of systems in which there has been vegetation management. Wildfires have come through, and we see how fire behavior has been influenced. So this is I think this is Shasta or Lassen National Forest. The area in the orange polygon was thinned 10 years before this fire. This is the goat fire in 2000. We see that the fire dropped out of the canopy. The rest of that fire footprint is canopy, crown mortality, above ground biomass mortality, but the area that's thinned is still healthy. Here we have thinned versus unthinned on the blue line. We see unthinned, we have surface fire where the fire didn't go up into the canopy, stay in the ground, and the untreated area that crowned out and killed those trees. And by all accounts, the reason that South Lake Tahoe did not burn down was because of the extensive amount of fuels treatment projects that were conducted over the last 10 years in that area. And so they play just a critical role in you know, the WUI, but outside the WUI as well on the landscape. Most of these fires that we're experiencing are not starting in urban areas or in the WUI. They're starting out in the wilderness, out in the wildlands, out in the forested land, and moving into these systems. And so getting good management practices, sustainable management practices on the landscape are going to be critical in how we think about fire in the future and how we manage and become more fire adapted in the future. So what is thinning? Thinning is this idea of removing ladder fuels, increasing horizontal and vertical space, reducing that continuity of fuels. We want fewer and more big trees. Basically, all the things that we're talking about within defensible space are the same kind of rules that we're looking at, or the same kind of goals we're looking to achieve in the forest land. And the idea here is that you start with something on this image on the top, where we have relatively dense stand conditions. We're opening it up a little bit. Here's what it looks like in practice. We removed a lot of ladder fuels, spaced the trees out. We have bigger trees, but we're not removing all the small trees, right? Because remember, that's our regeneration. That's our next cohort that's going to replace these big trees as they get old and die. But we're changing the structure of the forest so that we change the fire behavior when it comes through these systems, right? Fire is not a matter of if, it's when. Fire will come through our forest lands, through our natural resource and our ecosystems. And so we need to be prepared for it. And so in the previous graphic that I showed that was similar to this, we had all that, you know, ladder fuel, mid-story fuel, all that biomass on the ground. And so the fire easily was carried up into the canopy. But now that we removed all that vegetation, it's more likely to stay on the ground. That doesn't mean that we're keeping it out of the canopy completely, but more of the area that burns is what we call lower severity, low to moderate severity, and less of the forest is experiencing moderate high severity fire. So when we're thinning, we can thin for lots of different reasons. As I said, we're really focusing kind of the lens of wildfire. So we really want fuels reduction. So this is an example of a fuels reduction project where the thin, small, suppressed, and weak trees are removed. That's not only a fuels reduction project for a wildfire resiliency in the stand, but also is kind of a forest health approach to managing, where you're reducing the amount of competition between and within species to free up nutrients and create bigger of those trees. So not only are they more resilient to fire, but they're also healthier, they grow stronger, and it's just a more sustainable forest condition. We can thin for strategic regions. So shaded fuel breaks is, I'm sure, something a lot of you have been talking about, or maybe implementing, or know about, or thinking about. And they're just kind of these really cool ways of thinking about forest thinning when, you know, ideally we'd love to manage as much of the landscape as we can, but it's not always realistic because of the expense, and ecologically, we don't want to always have our fingerprints continuously on the natural resources. But we can strategically thin in areas where there's high value, like roads and ridges, where we can have fire suppression efforts, or we can have safety zones, things like that, where we want to create defensible space, giving firefighters a place to either fight the fire itself to protect the community, or maybe it's in tandem with other types of forest management practices. But the idea of a shaded fuel break overall is to change fire behavior. So this is a great picture on the left. We see that here we have, you know, essentially a stand replacement fire, and then the strip of green. Well, that's your shaded fuel break. And I think this is really important to emphasize at this point, that shaded fuel breaks are not intended to stop fire. They're not intended to be a point where the fire hits it and it puts itself out. The idea is, as I mentioned, to change the fire behavior, to give fire suppression resources a chance to either indirect or direct attack that fire, or they're coupled with other forest management, so the fire behavior changes such that the fire eventually does put itself out, or it protects communities. So these are strategic thinnings that have very specific goals, but they are not intended, as some people think, to actually stop fire. And then, you know, this is something we're all familiar with. When I mentioned there's a lot of conifer encroachment, and so not only are we thinning in these systems to release the oaks from the conifers, right? This is a natural process succession in the absence of fire. So it's not that we have a problem with invasion. We just have the natural occurrence where you remove fire from the system, the conifers thrive, the hardwoods don't do as well. So we're removing the conifers, we're releasing the oaks, we're improving the vigor and health of these systems, conserving and restoring oak health. But we're also having the added benefit of reducing fuel loading, so that when fires do come through these systems, our oaks are more resilient to that wildfire, and we have less chances of high severity fire with above ground biomass mortality and more damage to these systems. So these are really cool projects because it's really tangible. You can go in there and thin, and you have a specific goal in mind, and you say, wow, look, that oak was buried behind all that Doug fir regeneration, and now it's these beautiful oak woodlands, these big nice trees, and now I can do other types of forest management practices in there that we'll talk about in a second. And then lastly, thinning is used to improve forest health, right? It's a lens of fuels reduction, but the same kind of metrics that we look at to say we're reducing fuels to increase resilience to wildfire, we're reducing fuels to reduce competition and improve the vigor of our trees. We're creating healthier and more well-spaced out trees so that are more resilient to insect disease, wildfire, and other types of disturbance. So here we have on the bottom left, high elevation dry lodgepole pine forest where they're thinning to help facilitate vigorous trees and shift to a late sterile or a near old growth forest health condition. On the right, we have an old growth redwood. This is a project that Save the Redwood Leagues is doing up in Humboldt County, where they're thinning through these old growth systems to remove the competition and reduce the amount of fuels to help improve the vigor and health and longevity of these old growth trees. And so they have lots of it's not just a simple, you're reducing fuels, now you're reducing wildfire risk or risk of high severity wildfire, but you're also improving all these other aspects that have ecological functions as well as economic incentives. So how do we achieve these thinning projects, right? So we can do cool things like use masticators or mulching heads on heavy equipment. I think these are fascinating and terrifying machines. They're really fun to watch, but it's rather kind of awe-inspiring to watch them really take down a tree very quickly and turn it into mulch. So you can use the inside stands to do thinning, or a very popular application because it's a really easy thing to do is use it as a way of improving and expanding shaded fuel breaks or fuel breaks along road systems. We can do hand thinning. I'm sure everyone here at some point has practiced hand thinning, whether it's in your defensible space zone or in the landscape where you got a chainsaw, handsaw, whatever, and you're cutting down and managing vegetation. It works really well. It's light impact as far as the type of equipment used, but it's a lot of work and it's very expensive to do when you hire professionals. But it's a really efficient tool. And there's lots of programs that there are available to help people achieve these kinds of projects using minimal impact. There's commercial thinning. I think this is important to mention here. I know a lot of folks maybe are not interested in commercial thinning, and that's absolutely fine, but I think it's important to leave this on the table because if you have merchantable trees and within your defensible space zone or on the landscape, you want to thin that forest out, improve health, reduce fuel loading, and some of those trees are merchantable, you can harvest those trees and any return on investment can be shunted and directly spent right back into managing the forest land. So it's not that you're going to make money, it's that you take whatever profit you potentially will make, and to be fair, there isn't usually a lot, but whatever's there, you can directly reinvest back into managing the landscape. So it's a pretty neat tool to help continue and expand the amount of work that people can do on the landscape. This is an example. So this is a kind of interesting example. This was the salvage logging. So this was in the Tubbs fire footprint. They thinned out initially after the fire, and then they're coming through and doing another round of thinning. They did 2 commercial thins, and now they're doing some additional cleanup. But I think that stand looks really healthy and really good after all that work. So something that we create from all of this type of thinning work and this management, this vegetation management, is what we call slash. And slash is basically just that material that's left over after you prune a tree, cut a tree down. You create a lot of biomass that you have to then deal with. And that's required under forest practice rules. And it's required in the sense of if you leave it there, you haven't really removed the biomass from the forest. You still have all that fuel loading, so you have to do something with it. So traditional practices of managing slash are pile and burning. Maybe a lot of you have practiced that already. You can chip and mulch it, so different types of equipment to achieve that. You can remove it when you have the capacity to do that. You can just pull it out of the system. And then lastly, you can do a thing called lop and scatter. There's drawbacks and there's good and bad aspects of all of these types of managements. I don't prefer the whole removal of the system because the slash is really important. Just like we were talking about mulch and this biomass that you leave on the forest floor, it's really important for helping to protect the soil, for helping with moisture retention. It's the nutrients that will be broken down, recycled back into the system to help the growth of the large trees and the regeneration. So I'm not a big fan of removing it all, but I do like chipping and mulching. Pile burning works really well. You can produce biochar with certain techniques of pile and burning. And lop and scatter is great if you have a really active system where you have a lot of decomposition. If you don't, and what we've been experiencing these last rounds of significant wildland fires is that the pile and burn, or the lop and scattered slash, stays on the forest floor. And then when the fire comes through, there's so much fuel accumulated down there that it actually creates high intensity surface fires, and we get a lot of above ground biomass mortality. So lop and scatter is the cheapest also implementation. And I like the idea of leaving the biomass there, but if you're not going to treat it in other ways, it can present a risk. So there is certainly a reason to manage that slash to some extent. I will say in certain circumstances, and I'll talk about this in a second, there's a place and time for lop and scatter, and I'll talk about that next. Real quick, another tool that we use and is becoming more and more popular is grazing. I mean, I don't know how many of you have experience with grazing, particularly goats. The things will eat anything. It's amazing. You just if you put them on any green succulent material, they climb manzanitas. They eat manzanita leaves. They eat poison oak. They eat blackberries. They eat broom. They eat anything that grows and is green, they will try to eat. So they are an amazing tool, and maybe not your first, kind of effort, but they're your long-term maintenance of the system. Grazing is a really awesome tool. And lastly, my favorite, and I think the most important tool that we have available to us. Remember, this is a toolbox. Not one solution works for everybody. We're implementing different practices for different reasons, for different goals and objectives. But my favorite, and I think one of the most important tools we have for the long-term maintenance of vegetation and forest lands, is prescribed fire. And so really that's the use of fire under predetermined conditions, and we're looking to achieve specific goals and objectives. And those can be to reduce hazards, so pile burning, ecosystem restoration, right? Oak woodlands need fire to regenerate, so do redwood forests. Vegetation management, habitat enhancement, you name it, prescribed fire fits that role, right? We're in a fire-adapted ecosystem. Fire has shaped the flora and fauna. Returning good fire to the landscape is the way that we manage these systems. And this is where I believe that lop and scatter is a good role. If you plan to ultimately burn your forest stand, you need fuel continuity to help carry that fire through that system. If you thin and remove all that vegetation, there's nothing to carry this fire. So this is where you can leave that lop and scatter strategically placed in your forest to help carry a prescribed fire. If you're not going to do prescribed burning, followed up on that, then you need to manage that slash. And this is an example of how prescribed fire, we know there's lots of evidence, but this is an example from our area. This is the glass fire. On the left side of the image on the 2-track is the glass fire footprint. On the right is a unit that a landowner had been thinning, and also we had burned with prescribed fire about almost a year before the glass fire. This was not suppression efforts. This was on the big blow up day of the glass fire. The fire did not burn into the prescribed burning unit, and there was no suppression resources. There was no help there. This was wind, this was hot and dry. It literally, there was no fuels for it to catch, and so it didn't even burn. You can see the trees on the right are still alive. They're still good. Here's inside the stand. The burn scars are from the prescribed burn, but you see all of the trees. If I had a nice comparison, you would see that all the standing conifers outside of the burn unit were top killed. These are still healthy and alive. So prescribed fire has phenomenal functionality in these systems and is a fantastic management tool when used properly. So in short, right, fire is an important essential disturbance in our ecosystem. We want to develop a plan, right? We just want to kind of hack at the trees until we feel good about it. We want to set up a long-term plan. We want to determine our goals and objectives and decide how we're going to get there. You have to work with a resource professional in California. Anybody who practices forestry is required to be a professional, what's called a registered professional forester, an RPF. And so I highly recommend that your first steps is to start working with professionals. There are landowner assistance programs, which I'll talk about in a second. And I mentioned this and I've been hinting at it, but this is not a one and done. And we all know this. Forest management is ongoing commitment, and that you're going to have to continually manage vegetation through time. And if you don't, you can invest a lot of time and effort now. And if you don't follow up on that, it'll be for naught, because when fire does come, if you're not managing that vegetation long term, you're going to not really get the outcome you want when fire does happen. So the resources, there's a lot of resources. This is only a short list. There's more on the web, our website. But for technical resources, first of all, get yourself an RPF if this is something you're really interested in developing a long-term forest management plan. the Resource Conservation Districts or the Natural Resource Conservation Service, RCD, NRCS. Fantastic resources. Myself and within UC Cooperative Extension, me and our team are technical assistants for vegetation management. Financial, there's two really great cost share programs. One's called Environmental Quality Incentives Program, this EQIP through NRCS. And then the other one is California Forest Improvement Program, CFIP through CAL FIRE. They're both cost share incentives, meaning that you pay the upfront cost and then they reimburse you for that effort. A new one that's short term, but still really great, and this is kind of a different vehicle, is the North Bay Forest Improvement Program. This is a really cool collaboration between the RCDs and Rebuild North Bay, in which Rebuild North Bay is acting like the bank, and they're paying for upfront for the cost of implementation and then get reimbursed from the CAL FIRE grant that the RCDs have achieved. So it's a really cool model. It's very competitive. It's short-term program, as where EQIP and CFIP have been around for a very long time. And then because I'm really excited about, and I think everybody should be thinking about this, especially in West County, is let's think about prescribed fire and how do we get to a point where we're burning as much acreage as we can for management of the health of the forest using prescribed fire. And so you can reach out to me. I forgot the link here. We have a website called CalPBA, calpba.org. All the information you want to know about prescribed fire in California can be found there. And then of course, CAL FIRE has their vegetation treatment program that you can certainly reach out and talk to them about. So I know I went through that fast, but it's a small amount of time. I would be happy to answer any questions during our Q&A. These are our resources. You can email me, check out UCCE Mendocino. Even though I cover 3 counties, most of my information is posted on this website, my forestry page, as well as the UCANR kind of umbrella parent page for forestry. And all the information I talked about, plus much, much more, can be found there. So I also want to thank my colleagues, Mary Maeda, who's with the NRCS, and Ricky Satomi, who's a forest advisor in Reading, for help with this presentation and content. So thank you, everyone, for your time. And I guess questions now?
Perfect. Mike, do you want to stop sharing and then we'll just go to the panel? We'll panel and open it up for Q&A. And can you, I thought I talked fast, but you might have me beat. Was it Cal PVA?
I'll type it in the chat.
Perfect. Awesome.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mike. We've had a little bit of a chat going on about, because there's so many questions that go into forest management, and I think that we should probably have another forum specifically about forest management, because that's a really big topic, and there are a lot of really great resources. Some folks who aren't here today, but I was just at Pepperwood on Sunday and went through a 4-hour training with them about forest management and all kinds of different conditions, and they're a great resource as well, Pepperwood Preserve. So should we look at some of the questions going back? Most of them in the Q&A we were able to answer, but there were some that I actually said, let's talk about it in the Q&A. But just to let you all know that we will send out the PowerPoint PDF of this, and then we can also send out a recording to those who have attended, or for those who have signed up.
And Ellie, could we also, so we will be sending out a survey in about 4 to 6 weeks, and we'd love it if you could give us feedback on what worked for you, what didn't work for you, and then what actions you may have taken on your property as a result of the presentation. We, as Ellie mentioned, we are funded by a County of Sonoma Vegetation Management Grant, which we're really grateful for. So that'll be part of our reporting back to the county for that funding. So watch out for that in probably about 4 to 6 weeks.
So there was one question, somebody was asking about planting adjacent to trees like our redwoods. Is it possible to plant shrubs near trees? And one thing I would say, redwoods do have very thick bark, which are resistant to burning through, but they will catch fire. So it's really important to keep anything flammable away from the base of all trees, because you just don't want any fire to be climbing up and possibly getting into the canopy. But it is okay, as April said, to be planting under redwood trees. You just have to be careful, the plants that you choose, and make sure they stay well maintained and free of redwood duff, which is very flammable.
But if they're established, it's brutal to get through the root structure to get anything planted.
Yeah. There's a question, what is the difference between, oh, it looks like, between mulch, compost, and wood chips. And it looks like either Jen or you answered that.
That was Jen.
One thing I know that April has spoken a lot about is that compost, which has a good deal of nutrients in it. A lot of compost actually has additives that are nitrogen, like chicken manure and other manures. And so they're high in nutrients and they're not necessarily good for native plants. Native plants really prefer a fairly porous soil. So certain mulches like arbor mulch, which is the mulch that comes from from our green bins that has been partially composted, is actually okay to use. But again, any sort of mulch you want to keep away from flammable structures and fences, and even keep slightly away from the base of your plants. And then wood chips, I've attended presentations by fire professionals in which they have said wood chips are fine. And Chief Connect, you might want to speak about this. You just don't want them to be too deep, and you want to keep them away. The different mulches and chips have, mulch doesn't tend to have a flame length that will actually smolder, and wood chips may have a little bit of a flame length. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. When I think about mulching or lop and scatter or everything, you're getting the vegetation that can burn, that's surrounded by oxygen and the air on the ground and dense. So it has a less access to oxygen to be able to burn with intensity. So if there's a decent, sort of a mulch wood chip, that's okay. The fire is less intense for us, especially if it's shaded. Where I would recommend against, or really being smart about what you put around your 0 to 5 zone around your structures is what kind of mulch. Can you pick a different kind of a cover? But everywhere else, yeah, if it's a mulch and it's at least for us as firefighters, it's on the ground, and the fires tend to be less intense and easy to put out on a mulched area.
Can we look at another question here? How do any of these recommendations shift in our more urbanized parts of West County? Grayton, for example, I actually live in Grayton, have a lot of friends there. Small lots, close house spacing, lots of fences, not clear the right strategy in these places. Chief Connect, do you want to answer that? I mean, I think we each have something to say, but we might want to just start with you.
Sure. We look at the Tubbs fire, went across West 101, went right through Coffee Park. No one would ever even imagine or entertain that was a wildfire receptive area. Again, that was a very wind-driven event that was tragic and terrible that we're still recovering from. But as far as the West County, where it's a little more urbanized, a little more dense, you can still control what you can amongst your property. You still can reduce the spacing of plants horizontally and vertically. You can still be smart about the mulch and the 5 to 30 foot zones, and then the 30 to your property line. If you're really talking about a dense zone where you're less than 100 feet from the property line, you can still reduce the chances of an intense fire or a fire getting established from spotting from a distant fire. I really want to, and Michael hit it about the shaded fuel breaks they don't stop fires. I want to remind everybody that the 2020 glass fire jumped the Napa Valley. You cannot engineer a greater fire break than the Napa Valley. And so when you talk about 1.5 miles of spotting in extreme conditions, you have to worry about ember casts and stuff that's landing in and around your house. So that's why, we really focus heavily on defensible space. So we don't have to commit resources necessarily to structure defense if it's well maintained. And the 0 to 5 zone is super important. One more little thing about sort of dense areas is fences. Fences, we're finding that when they connect to a structure, the fence, it's a low intensity fire, but then the fence catches fire, and then the fence catches on the house on fire. And we just don't have enough fire engines to go to every single structure that's experiencing a small fire in the area of a large wildfire. And that's, the sad truth, which is why we really emphasize good defensible space around your homes, regardless of location, whether you're in the WUI or in the intermix zone or wherever you are.
And could I just add, so we did a pared down version of our presentations today to make room for the forest management presentation from Mike, which was phenomenal. And I saw lots of great comments. I think you guys really appreciated that. But that's where organizations like Safer West County and bringing community together, we usually really talk about community and needing to work as a community to be better prepared. And that's why we're so thrilled to partner with orgs like Safer West County that are coming together in community to look at not just your individual work with your home hardening and defensible space that Chief Connect talked about, but broader community lens as well. So Amy, I don't know if you want to make any comments to that regard.
We're really hopeful that people will sign up with Safer West County so that they become part of their individual fire safe council, which many of these are emerging. You could be very active or just be on the sideline, but they will structure events and work days and things very specific to your area, because even in West County, we have quite a variety. I mean, even within Occidental, we have Chaparral and Redwood and some, Savannah hillsides. So it really does mean that you've got to work in your smallest of regions together. And that's what Safer West County is doing, is activating these various regions. And we've even talked with this group, which I'm so grateful for all of our presenters today. And Ellie and I have talked about how can we do something very specific, going out to homes in neighborhoods, having neighbors come and listen and work through it at a very micro level, so that we really get some great ideas and we start working together and spreading the news to each other, because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take us really being responsible.
Just to give to follow up on Amy, but also an immediate answer, just remembering get rid of anything dead or dying. I know Grayton, I know how small and how close houses are, and anybody being 30 feet away is that you got a big yard. So so just getting rid of anything dead. Look at your fences, get rid of the 0 to 5 is the most important thing, and harden your home. Those are the most important things to do first. And then we asked in the poll in the beginning if people would be interested in getting trained to be a home hardening and a defensible space assessor. And there were, I think, at least 40 people who said they would be interested. And Roberta McIntyre of Fire Safe Sonoma is willing to do a training. There would be 2-3 hour sessions, and I did the training. It was pretty easy. But then, we can actually have neighborhood leaders be able to go out and help their neighbors figure out what's going on. And as I said, I live in Grayton, so I can help organize one here. But we also have funding to do separate from the assessor's training to actually go into 2 or 3 different neighborhoods from this community. And I think we had how many people signed up, said they would go to one of those tours? I don't remember that poll, but I think there were 60 people said they would. So we are planning to do that in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And I can't remember how we decided we were going to get in touch with people who said they would be interested. Can we have
why don't we have everybody send actually sign up at Safer West County and make a note for it that they want to be included in that, and that way we can organize by region where those people have signed up.
Yeah, and do it quickly, because we want to do it in the next 3 weeks before the end of October. So can you just put your the website in the chat one more time?
I was just going to suggest that.
And and you all, we're down to 87 people. So, and we're past 8 o'clock, but I'm really excited about doing it. It's part of what we're being funded for. So let's make sure we get to it.
And we will send out an email through our Resilient Landscape Coalition email with the video and more contact too.
Yeah. So if you're not looking in the chat, it's firesafeoccidental.org. So just go there, and is it going to be obvious where to sign up, Amy?
Yeah, it's right at the top. Just sign up
Okay.
for the newsletter. There should be a place for you to make notes in there.
Right, I think we got through most of the questions.
Did, and if there's others that we missed, we can maybe include that when we send out the video link and
The
the
email, yeah.
PDF, or you're welcome to send any of us email messages with questions as well.
Thank you all for joining.
Thank you
Wow,
so
that was
Thank
a
you
well-attended
very, very
workshop.
much. And thank you for all of the presenters and everybody on the panel. I really, really appreciate you all being here.
Thanks for the work you're doing, Amy. It's really important.
It's a group effort.
All right. Well, good night, everybody. Stay safe.
Yeah, good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.